Imagine a heavy steel vault door. It is secured by dozens of thick, interlocking deadbolts, designed to withstand a direct blast. Yet, because a single, tiny screw holding the primary hinge vibrates loose, the entire structure crashes to the floor. Complex systems often fail not because they lack strength, but because their complexity creates microscopic points of total failure. This document outlines the academic concept of strategic stability. Strategic stability refers to the ability of rival nations to interact during crises, without those disputes escalating into a nuclear exchange. It is the invisible architecture keeping the world intact. Maintaining that stability relies entirely on solving the foundational paradox of the atomic age, the always-never dilemma. You can think of a nuclear arsenal like a loaded firearm. The system must act as a hair trigger, guaranteeing the weapon will always fire instantly in the event of a sudden enemy strike. At the same time, it requires an impenetrable drop safety, ensuring the weapon will never discharge by accident. The dilemma is that these two goals are structurally opposed. Optimizing any system to be always ready to launch in milliseconds inherently degrades its ability to never fire accidentally. A perfectly safe weapon cannot be fired quickly, and a rapidly deployable weapon cannot be perfectly safe. Over the last 60 years, the trillions of dollars invested in these failsafes have consistently fallen short. Our continued survival hasn't been guaranteed by flawless engineering, but by individuals who chose to defy the logic of broken systems when the pressure reached its peak. Nuclear delivery systems require thousands of perfectly synchronized moving parts. Engineers build extreme physical redundancies into these machines to ensure reliability. However, stacking complex mechanisms on top of each other breeds unpredictable physical vulnerabilities that fracture under stress. In 1961, a B-52 bomber flying over Goldsboro, North Carolina, experienced a structural failure and broke apart mid-air. As the fuselage disintegrated, the aircraft dropped two 24-megaton nuclear bombs directly over the American South. This declassified memo details the government's examination of the weapons after the crash. It proves how fragile the internal safety mechanisms actually were. The force of the impact destroyed 5 of the 6 interlocking safety mechanisms. Only a single switch prevented a 24-megaton detonation. Returning to our vault analogy, this is the equivalent of dropping a bank vault off a building and watching 5 of its 6 heavy deadbolts snap open simply because they hit the pavement. The failsafes did not fail gracefully, they shattered. 7 years later, during the 1968 Thule Air Base crash, a banal cabin fire forced an American flight crew to abandon another B-52. The jet crashed onto the Greenland ice, destroying 4 nuclear weapons and scattering radioactive material across the Arctic. But the ultimate demonstration of minor physical entropy defeating massive infrastructure happened in 1980 at the Damascus Titan II missile complex in Arkansas. A maintenance worker conducting routine checks accidentally dropped an 8-pound socket wrench. It fell 70 feet down the silo and punctured the pressurized fuel tank of an intercontinental ballistic missile carrying a 9-megaton warhead. It was the equivalent of a pebble destroying a jet engine. The military lacked a localized disaster plan for a leak of this specific nature, and the resulting massive fuel explosion blew the 740-ton silo door and the nuclear warhead completely out of the ground. Trillions of dollars in hardware failsafes cannot out-engineer physical entropy. Mechanical perfection in complex, high-yield systems is a dangerous myth. This diagram maps the massive global digital monitoring network required to keep a nuclear arsenal always ready. Satellites and early warning radars blanket the Earth, scanning for launch heat signatures and ballistic trajectories. Because these sensors must detect and report threats in milliseconds, they can easily hallucinate existential attacks out of harmless data. In 1979, operators at NORAD watched their screens light up with a full-scale Soviet first strike. NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, is the joint U.S.-Canadian organization responsible for aerospace warning. The attack they saw was a total fabrication. A technician had accidentally loaded a highly realistic training tape into the live warning mainframe. 4 years later, in 1983, a Soviet early warning satellite alerted Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov that 5 U.S. Minuteman missiles were inbound toward Moscow. Minuteman missiles are United States land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles. The cause of this alarm was entirely mundane. Sunlight had glinted off high-altitude clouds at a highly specific angle, and the satellite's sensors interpreted the reflections as the thermal plumes of rocket engines. Petrov had to make a decision. He recognized that a logical American first strike would be an all-out barrage designed to cripple Soviet defenses, not a sparse 5-missile volley. He chose to trust human deduction over algorithmic certainty and reported the alarm as false. Consider a state-of-the-art home security alarm that triggers a massive, armed police raid because a stray cat walked past a motion sensor in the yard. The sensor worked exactly as engineered, but the context of the data was fatally absent. The end of the Cold War did not resolve this vulnerability. In 1995, the world faced the Norwegian rocket incident. This trajectory plot illustrates how a scientific rocket perfectly mimicked the radar signature, speed, and altitude of a Trident nuclear missile. This data triggered a terrifying timeline. Russian leadership had a strict 10-minute decision window to launch a retaliatory strike before the alleged weapon detonated. Russian President Boris Yeltsin actually opened his nuclear briefcase. He tracked the ghost threat for 8 of the 10 allotted minutes, prepared to order a launch, until the scientific rocket fell harmlessly into the Barents Sea. When early warning systems are engineered to react in milliseconds, they strip away critical human context. They force leaders to make civilization-ending decisions based entirely on algorithmic hallucinations. Beyond hardware and sensors, nations rely on military doctrine to organize their forces. To ensure an arsenal can survive a decapitation strike against the government, militaries utilize pre-delegation, pushing the legal authority to launch nuclear weapons down to lower-level commanders in the field. This academic report evaluates how delegating nuclear capabilities to lower-level commanders early in a crisis risks rapid, unintended escalation. The research concludes this specific arrangement drastically increases the likelihood of a launch, even if neither nation has formally crossed an established red line. We see the reality of this theory at the climax of the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis aboard the Soviet Foxtrot-class submarine B-59, which was trapped deep in the Sargasso Sea. Extreme conditions broke the crew's psychology. Temperatures exceeded 100 degrees, batteries were exhausted, and carbon dioxide poisoning caused the trapped sailors to pass out. Above them, U.S. Navy destroyers dropped practice depth charges to force the submarine to surface. The explosions blinded the acoustic sensors and severed radio links. Imagine being locked in a pitch-black closet. You are choking on bad air, while someone outside beats the door with a sledgehammer, and you are holding a live grenade. Cut off from command and under apparent attack, Captain Valentin Savitsky reached a logical, doctrine-driven conclusion. He assessed that World War III had already begun on the surface, and it was his explicit military duty to arm and fire his 15-kiloton nuclear torpedo at the American fleet. The launch required the consent of 3 officers. It was only stopped by the unprecedented defiance of the flotilla's chief of staff, Vasily Arkhipov. Operating purely on human instinct rather than military protocol, Arkhipov vetoed the launch, preventing a nuclear exchange. While the B-59 incident was born of tactical chaos, strict doctrine also creates massive strategic dangers. In 1983, a military exercise known as Able Archer almost triggered a preemptive war. NATO forces initiated a hyper-realistic wargame. They enforced strict radio silence, shifted command posts, and airlifted 19,000 troops. These exact logistical steps perfectly matched the KGB's doctrinal indicators for a genuine, incoming surprise attack. The KGB was the primary security agency for the Soviet Union. Rigid military doctrines are designed to impose order on the fog of war. In practice, they inevitably manufacture the panic and miscalculation that lead directly to unauthorized launches. When we plot these 8 case studies together, they form a clear record of recurring failure, a timeline where the survival of civilization was decided not by the protocols, but by a handful of people choosing human reason over algorithmic panic. In traditional information security, a dropped socket wrench or a badly coded algorithm results in a data breach or a server outage. In the architecture of nuclear command, that same minor error ends civilization. The entire apparatus of global deterrence relies on the false premise of perfect information and flawless mechanical reliability. We trust the machines to be infallible. As long as the always-never dilemma exists, building denser sensor networks, machining tighter hardware, and writing stricter rules will never guarantee safety. The system is structurally compromised by its own power. The ultimate safeguard for strategic stability is not technological perfection. It is near-term de-escalation, rigorous political oversight, and the fragile, irreplaceable application of human reason in the face of absolute systemic failure. We must question the infallibility of the complex systems that govern our lives, because the margins for error do not exist.